Okay. Good evening, Parshas Naso. We are returning to a subject that we've discussed multiple times in the context of this class, usually during Parshas Naso. And the issue is the subject of the Nazir, who appears in Parshas Naso. So on page 758, 759, Hashem says to Moshe, if a man or a woman, if they will take a vow of Nazirus, the law is they must avoid any type of wine, and they should not cut their hair, and should not come into contact with a dead body. And the Torah uses an interesting word in this process. This is in Pasuk Hey. Kol Yemei Neder Nizro, all the days of his vow to be a Nazir. Tar lo yavor al rosho, a razor shall not cross over his or pass over his head. Ad melos hayamim asher yazir l'Hashem, until the completion of the days which he took the vow of Nazirus to Hashem. Kadosh yiyeh, he shall be holy. Gadol peras arosho, and let the hair on his head grow. So, if you read this, it sounds like the Nazir becomes a holy person. The long hair is a symbol of his spiritual elevation. You know, there's some societies, especially amongst the hippies, who would love to quote this to teach us that the long hair is a sign of someone who is holier and not so involved in the pleasures of this world.
I don't think you could say that was true of the hippies.
Right. Well, but the Torah does seem to suggest that he is a holy person. And it's interesting that the Torah uses, of all three things, avoiding wine, not taking the haircut, and not coming into contact with dead bodies, I would probably have put this as number 3 in terms of signs of holiness. But it's here that the Torah puts these words that he's considered holy. And there's a reason for that.
Is the word in Hebrew specifically razor?
Yes.
So is that as opposed to a scissor?
Yeah, so that's all part of the halachic discussion is how could he cut his hair, but he really can't cut his hair in any way.
Okay.
Right.
But kadosh also means separate. So can't we use that translation instead of...
Yeah, I still would have said that. I don't know if the long hair makes him separate.
I'm saying, rather than saying he's holy...
Well, we'll see. Our sages did understand that there's some level of holiness too. But we'll get to that. Right? Then the Torah repeats itself in verse 8, Pasuk Ches, Kol Yemei Nizro, Kadosh Hu L'Hashem. So here it's a little more clear that the Kedusha is for Hashem. Then the Torah says later, this is in verse 11, this is talking about where the Nazir had an accident. He found himself having come into contact with a dead body. He was in a room and someone died. It wasn't his fault. So he becomes Tameh, and he now has to basically atone for what he did and start over. And it says, V'asah ha'kohen echad l'chatas ve'echad la'olah. The Kohen should bring him these 2 offerings. V'chiper alav me'asher chata al hanafesh, and he should atone for him for having sinned by coming into contact with a dead body. What was his sin? What was his sin? It wasn't his fault.
Not being careful, I guess.
So he became Tameh. He became Tameh. You could say his vow was broken, but let's say he was careful. So Rashi brings 2 explanations, and we're going to go back to the source to see these explanations. But let's just read from Rashi inside. Mi'ashachata ala nefesh. Explanation number 1 says Rashi, Shelo nizhar mitumas hames, that he was not careful not to become tameh. Explanation number 2 says Rashi, Rabbi Elazar hakapar omer, Shitzir atzmo min hayayin, his sin was the original taking of the vow. He should not have caused himself this personal discomfort of taking a vow not to come into contact with, well, in this case Rashi says the wine. So this is really a Gemara in Nedarim. The Gemara in Nedarim says, Rabbi Elazar hakapar b'Rabbi Omer, v'chiper alav, when the Torah says you should atone, mi'ashachata ala nefesh, because he sinned regarding the soul, v'chibi ezen nefesh chata, is that what it means? He sinned regarding the soul. If the Torah meant he sinned by coming into contact with a dead body, it should just be mi'ashachata l'tameh. But it says ala nefesh, regarding the soul. He sinned regarding the soul of the person who died. That's hard to read. The reason why he sinned is because he held himself back from being able to have wine. And we should learn the following lesson using the Kal V'chomer. If a person who only holds himself back from one thing, which is to be able to drink, is already called a sinner because he's hurting himself. If someone causes himself pain by withholding themselves from many things, you're definitely a sinner. Mikan, from here we learn, Kol hayoshev beta'anis nikra chote. Someone who takes a fast on themselves, someone who causes or afflicts themselves, is called a sinner. So again, we have opinion number 1, which is the opinion of Rabbi Elazar HaKapar, that you are a sinner if you become a Nazir. And if you're a sinner for becoming a Nazir, where you're only really limiting yourself from one indulgence, which is wine, certainly anyone who limits themselves from more indulgences is considered a sinner. To which the Gemara says, but one second, this verse which calls him a sinner is referring to someone, a Nazir who became Tameh. Says the Gemara, no. All Nazirs or Nazirim are considered sinners. The guy who became Tameh, he's a double sinner, because he shouldn't have taken the vow in the first place. And then once you do take the vow, at least be careful with it. So that's why the Torah calls him a real sinner. But the Rabbi Elazar HaKapar says that every Nazir is considered a sinner, even if a Nazir takes a vow for 30 days and passes through the 30 days without coming into contact with a dead body, without cutting his hair, and without drinking any wine, he's a sinner because he should not have taken on this vow of restriction.
Okay, what about the Rashi that talks about the juxtaposition of the Nazir with the Sota? It says that the reason that he took on this vow is because he felt that he needed to do this because he, in a certain sense, he needed to strengthen himself against.
Right, so we're gonna see how Rabbi Elazar HaKapar is going to approach that. Absolutely. That's going to be part of the question. Although we're not going to discuss the Sota so much. I think we've discussed that in the past. But let's go to, that was Nedarim 10a. We now turn to Tainus 11, where the Gemara says like this. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said, Kala Yoshev B'Ta'anis Nikra Chote. Anyone who takes on a fast is called a sinner. The Gemara explains that he follows the ruling of Rabbi Elazar HaKapar that we just read, who says that even just taking a vow from wine makes you a sinner, certainly if one prohibits himself from all food. However, Rabbi Elazar, not to be confused with Rabbi Elazar HaKapar, two different people, Rabbi Elazar, he says, Nikra Kadosh. On the contrary, if someone takes on a fast for themselves, they're called holy. Shenamar, as the Torah says, Kadosh yiyah gadol pera sa'arosho. Holy he is for having allowed his hair to grow long. In other words, for afflicting himself, is considered holy. So clearly our sages are reading this Kadosh as some sign of holiness. And therefore, he says, I make the opposite argument. If you're considered holy just from making yourself uncomfortable in one way, which is by not cutting hair, so someone who takes on a fast, causing themselves a great level of discomfort, should certainly be considered kadosh. So we have complete opposite opinions, right? The one says that the more you take on, the more greater a sinner you are, and the other one says the more you take on, the holier you are. To which the Gemara says, so I don't understand. What is the opinion that says it's a sinner? How do they understand the word kadosh? Says the Gemara, L'shmuel ha'ikri kadosh. How could Shmuel say you're a sinner? The Torah calls the Nazir holy. Says the Gemara, no. Look at which verse it's written. That holiness is written only regarding the hair. He's considered holy for withholding himself from cutting his hair, but he's not considered holy for the other restrictions that he takes on himself, because those are serious discomforts. This one isn't really a discomfort so much, the not cutting of the hair, especially if it's just for 30 days. And then there are those who read the Gemara that it means that the hair is holy, but not the Nazir. However, says the Gemara, okay, fine. So the opinion that says he's a sinner has explained why the Torah refers to him as holy. But explain to me how the opinion that says that a Nazir is holy, how does he understand that the verse refers to the Nazir as a sinner? Says the Gemara, Hahu desayiv nafshe, that's because he became tameh. He failed. So, in other words, this opinion will agree that a failed Nazir is a sinner. Don't take on something you can't handle, and then you have to become tameh.
Is a Nazir supposed to isolate himself from others?
He needs to be extremely careful and watchful. I mean, I guess we're assuming every time a mistake is made, there has to be some level of negligence. I mean, for the Nazir, I guess, during his 30 days, he should avoid anyone who looks like they're on the edge. Yeah. Says the Gemara. One second. I have the opinion of Shmuel, who says he's a sinner. I have the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, who says he's holy. Says the Gemara, but I have a contradiction in the words of Rabbi Elazar. Because Rabbi Elazar said, La'olam yamud adam atzmo, a person should always see himself, ki'ilu kadosh sharui betoch me'av. A person should always see their body as being holy. A person should always see their body as being holy. And therefore, so therefore, a person is supposed to take care and provide for the body as if, excuse the words, that's almost like he's saying, the body is a temple that we have to provide for and not cause pain to. So how can Rabbi Elazar say that a Nazir is considered holy if Rabbi Elazar has another teaching where he says a person should always see their body as a holy entity that needs to be provided for? The Gemara gives a very puzzling answer. Ha the matzi litzuure nafshe. This is a situation or a case or the kind of person who is able to afflict himself. In other words, he can handle it. Ha the lo matzi litzuure nafshe, and this is for someone who can't handle it. Those are the Gemaras, and that's very difficult because we're saying now that actually even the opinion who says that a Nazir is considered a sinner, or a Nazir is considered holy. He's only considered holy if he can handle it. If he can't handle it, on the contrary, he should consider his body holy and provide for the body. And this confusion of whether we're looking at the Nazir restricting himself as something positive, which we encourage, which it would totally be the simple way of reading the verses. You read the verse, the Nazir is a holy person, and this is such a righteous thing to do. But the Gemara seems to have differing opinions on it, almost going to the extreme. It almost sounds like most of the opinions, even the opinion that says you should do it, is only saying it if it's something that's easy for you to handle.
So if it's easy to handle, what's the significance of doing it?
So you're still causing yourself discomfort, but not something that's intolerable.
But you're not fasting when you're a Nazir.
Right. But still, you're holding yourself back from wine. Right?
I guess it's tough to do.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So when he gets, when he sins by being with the corpse, is that on being unable to handle it? Is that considered unable to handle it?
Not in Rabbi Lazar. We're just saying if a person, because Rabbi Lazar is really discussing fasting. That's really his main topic of that he's discussing. The Gemara is connecting it to Nazir. But he's saying the concept of taking on a fast, which we're assuming is an extension of this. Rabbi Lazar is going to say a person who handles fasting well, then he's called a kadosh for doing it. If he doesn't handle fasting well, then on the contrary, you should see his body as a temple and take care of it and make it, keep it happy.
But since you're connecting it to the Nazir, so would that make, like, to say if he can handle it, what does that mean? I mean, if he can handle it, he's not going to die.
Well, we'll focus more on the wine. That if it doesn't cause him major discomfort and a major test for him, then it's something he can do.
In other words, if he's addicted and he goes through withdrawal, then he shouldn't.
Maybe that's the way. Or just someone who, gets stressed out when they don't have their glass of wine at the end of the day, then don't do. Or someone who feels any type of major discomfort.
In this era, was wine more common to drink as a beverage than?
It's before Coca-Cola. So yeah, wine was more common. Yeah.
So there was nothing to drink other than water. When there was
They had fruit juice, but you had to squeeze it fresh, right?
But they could take it on long trips. They could preserve it for a very long time.
So they had beer and they had whatever, but wine definitely was more common than it would be today. I don't know if we said to someone that they had to avoid all soft drinks, that might be the equivalent of today.
So is beer, when they say kol shechar, it's also
There it's aged wine.
it's only wine.
Right.
So they can drink beer and hard liquor.
Only if it doesn't originate from grapes.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, so this, I think, is a good point to focus in on just a general question of people taking on restrictions for themselves. Are restrictions for ourselves a good thing or a bad thing? And anyone will tell you that a good New Year's resolution is something, basically, what most people do is they say, this is the year I'm going to quit, fill in the blank. And I think almost everyone, universally, we would say that taking on some restriction, especially in a place that a person has a hard time giving that up, that would be considered a positive thing. And here we have an overwhelming feeling of suggestion here that it's not considered such a positive thing. Now, if we're talking, let's say, let me differentiate this very clearly. If we're talking about quitting smoking, so I think nobody's arguing with that, because you shouldn't be smoking in the first place. It's causing you harm. And so giving it up is not taking on something more, it's giving up something less. I don't think that's even part of the discussion. If you're stopping to do something harmful, that's definitely not part of this discussion. But what we're talking about is a person mostly saying to themselves, I feel like I want to atone or become a better person, or I want to, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take on some level of restriction. And I think as an extension of this question is a further question, which I don't think we're going to get into today, but I'd like to get into it at some point, which is the concept of taking on a chumrah.
I was hoping you'd get to that.
Right? Of taking on some type of stringency, and what the motivation for taking on a stringency is. Now, I discussed this many months ago, something like 7 or 8 months ago, when we were discussing before the high holidays, when we have to prepare in the process of teshuvah. We discussed clearly then that within the process of teshuvah, any area that a person might have failed in the past, one of the methods of atoning for that is by going a little bit in the other direction. Extreme is an extreme word, but definitely going in that direction towards more stringency in order to atone and make up. And even though, if a person, just using a random example, if a person wasn't keeping Shabbos so well, so they take on a little bit more on Shabbos, it actually works that way. You don't have to say, well, 1 second, I was failing in 20 years worth of Shabboses, so then how am I going to make that up with one chumrah? I need 30 chumras. It doesn't work that way. Just a little bit of stringency within the process of what you do know goes a long way in terms of atonement for something you didn't know. And that might be true, but we're questioning even that. Maybe a person shouldn't. If you're not holding there, if you're not ready, a person should be where they are, and pushing themselves to go beyond that is maybe not okay. Furthermore, and I've seen this question many times, is the issue of a person questioning whether they can take on a stringency or a chumrah in one area, if maybe they're not so complete in more basic areas. So, and a lot of people like to do this. They like to take something which they really like, something they're comfortable with, and go to an extreme on that, because that's easy for them to work with. And then they'll forget to work on themselves in more basic areas. And that's, I think, another separate question of whether you're allowed to do that in those cases. But we're going to bring it back just to this case of where a person is doing something in order to be restrictive and limiting for themselves as a method of atonement. Maybe that's not okay. So, the Gemara in Bava Kama has an interesting debate. And I'd like you, if you could, to weigh in on this debate, because I think this is something that almost everyone has an opinion about. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said to him, I'm going to skip all the introduction, but basically Rabbi Akiva says, Adam rishai l'chavel ba'atzmo. A person is permitted to wound themselves. If I so choose, if I want to, I can wound myself. I can hurt myself if I want to.
I thought that was against.
Except for a dead person, to do it as a sign of mourning, you're not allowed to do it.
Well, says the Gemara, but that can't be. We know that the Mishnah says, she'eino rishai, a person is not allowed to wound themselves. Says the Gemara, what Rabbi Akiva meant is that you're allowed to embarrass yourself. You're allowed to cause yourself shame. You are in charge of your dignity, and if you so choose, you're allowed to cause yourself shame. Says the Gemara, what are you talking about? We see from there, the Gemara cites a source, that you're not even allowed to shame yourself, to which the Gemara basically concludes with Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said, Be'eshev betanis. A person is allowed to wound themselves means a person could restrict and limit themselves, and they can fast whenever they want to. So, what starts off as a statement from Rabbi Akiva, which sounds like a very unacceptable statement that a person is allowed to hurt themselves, so we're saying it's limited. You're not actually allowed to hurt yourself, but what you are allowed to do is take on an affliction or limit yourself from taking some things. But I'd like to go back to the original point. I think everyone reacted with, what are you talking about? You're not allowed to wound yourself. Why? Why am I not in charge of myself?
Your body's a temple.
Made in the image of God.
Well, we're not talking about when you put yourself in danger. I just want to cause myself pain. So we said before that when it says your body is a temple, that has to do with the food that you bring in. Is that a source? Let's try something more logical.
You say this is an allowance to smoke, in a sense?
Well, if you would be allowed to, no, because there it might be risking your life. But if a person wants to cut themselves, or I'm not talking about for a dead body, that would be a separate prohibition in the Torah. But if a person wants to hurt themselves in any way, if a person wants to take their hat and bash it against the wall, it's their choice to do if they want to feel pain. Why would it not be okay?
Well, it's just like with suicide. You're not allowed to kill yourself because your body doesn't belong to you. It belongs to Hashem.
Well, your life doesn't belong to you. Right? But my pain doesn't take away from my service of Hashem.
You're supposed to serve Hashem in joy. We have that tehillah.
That's a nice thing in terms of midos, but if that were true, if that were an obligation, then every time someone becomes sad, if it isn't for a good reason, then they would be transgressing that, so it should be no worse than that. So is that all you're saying? It's no worse than being sad when you shouldn't be?
No, but it's intentionally hurting yourself. I mean, that's different. It seems you may be sad over some event or something.
Well, if I tell you that there's this film you've got to watch, it's a really sad film, are you allowed to do that?
Mm-hmm.
You're allowed to? Why? Aren't you taking away from your joy in life? You're supposed to be happy?
It'd be a catharsis for you too.
Well, who said you're allowed to do that? Causing yourself pain? I mean, you watch this, you see it's a really nice story of,
Holocaust stories.
well, those might be more mourning for the Beis Hamikdash and for the Jewish people. I'm saying you just watch, one of these tear jerkers, and it's just meant for you to exhaust these emotions. And yeah, maybe it's therapeutic, but who said you're allowed to do that?
Who said you're not?
Well, that's what I'm asking. Because
Yes, first.
right? I mean, that's what we're discussing here, the prohibition of chovel ba'atzmo, to wound yourself. And as we see, the Gemara doesn't understand wounding only as physical wounds, because the Gemara actually says that when Rabbi Kiva said it was permitted, it means fasting. Now, fasting isn't wounding yourself, it's just, one day of fasting, what is it? It's a headache, and it's a caffeine withdrawal, it's maybe some hunger pains.
A temporary wounding.
Yeah, but it's not wound in the way that we think of, someone cutting it. But still, we're saying that that's considered wounding yourself. So then any kind of, I'm looking for more, what's the what's the issue here when it comes to wounding yourself?
Does the choice of what you do and the motivation, are those somehow related in that, are you choosing to wound yourself in a way that would be either a reminder of something that you need to be reminded about, or, to express, like the prophets might, put on sackcloth and ashes and mourn because they were wounding themselves, or, for a purpose, for, a sign, or to show what they meant, or to, so is the purpose?
Absolutely. And we have to go there.
Right.
We have to go to the question of, okay, before we discuss, are you allowed to wound yourself?
Why?
Why are you doing it?
Yeah, and what are you
Right.
choosing?
And that why is so important, because as much as someone will say, because I feel like it, that's not the case. And even if you have, chas v'shalom, you have teenagers who sometimes try to cope with life by hurting themselves, not killing themselves, but just by hurting themselves, they might tell you that they feel good when they do it or feel better when they do it, but that's only because they don't know the real reason why they're doing it, because they're not mature enough to process what's causing them to go there and to feel better. They feel better because there's some kind of chemical that rushes through the body when is it endorphins or something that rushes through the body when there's a wound like that helps.
Happy.
Right. So that makes them feel better. So whatever it is, but the question is, what are you feeling? Why'd you do it in the first place? That question is a very important question. So Tosfos in Masechtas Taanis says the same Shmuel who said in the Gemara in Taanis that if you sit and you fast, you're considered a sinner, is the same Shmuel who said in the Gemara in Bava Kama we just said, that when Rabbi Akiva said you're allowed to wound yourself, he meant you're allowed to sit in a fast. To which Tosfos says that...
It was embarrassed. Somebody
Well,
said,
that was the original answer. Then Shmuel said, no, it's only referring to fasting. To which Tosfos gives a very interesting answer. He says, if someone takes on a vow of Nazirus, back to our original question, such a person is definitely a sinner because they've caused themselves pain. But they are also doing a separate mitzvah of restricting themselves and limiting themselves. And the question is, in this case, which is more? The mitzvah of restricting yourself or the prohibition of restricting yourself?
what's the mitzvah of restricting?
Because the Torah talks, he says clearly, since the Torah gives the mitzvah of Nazir, Tosfos, there's a very difficult answer to Tosfos. He says, because we had a question, how can all these people treat Nazirus as a sin when the Torah, it's one of the 613 mitzvahs to take on the vow of Nazirus. You read the Torah, it sounds like a very positive thing. And the answer is, it is a positive thing. And you're doing a mitzvah by taking on the vow of Nazirus. But you're also committing a sin of hurting your body. And at this point, it becomes a question of which one is a bigger mitzvah or a bigger aver. Which is a bigger mitzvah? Are you accomplishing more through the act of fasting or restricting, or are you accomplishing more through the process of partaking?
Is it a mitzvah? I mean, it says ki yafli.
Yeah, no, it doesn't mean you have to do it, but if you do it, you're doing a mitzvah. No different than many of the other mitzvahs, right? You don't have to wear four-corner clothing, but if you do, and you put tzitzis on it, you wear...
But, I mean, we don't have something on wearing tzitzis that says you have to have a kapara for wearing tzitzis.
No, so Tosfos is explaining, because at the same time, you're also doing an avera. So you're going to get an atonement for doing the sin, but you're also at the same time doing a mitzvah.
So under what, it seems the way I'm looking at this, but it seems to say that when someone chooses to do this, this is how they should do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
But
So my question is, under what circumstances did people choose to do this? Was it because they felt they had done something wrong and they wanted to atone, or under what circumstances did people
so
usually
that's part of the question we asked before,
Yeah.
and that's going to be part of the answer, is that if we're talking about a mitzvah and an avera, when will one outweigh the other? So we're going to have the same person who's going to take on a vow of Nazirus, and he's going to do a mitzvah by following this process. He's going to do avera by restricting himself, and his sum total will be sin because of one reason, while someone else is going to go through the same process, and his sum total will be mitzvah because of another reason. So what's the difference between these two Nazirim?
But don't they all have to bring the offerings, including the sin offering, when they're done?
Yeah, because they're all sinning. The question is
mitzvah points.
right. That's the question. Was it worth it to sin and bring an atonement for it? It's only worth it if the mitzvah outweighs the avera. So coming back to what Dr. Appleson mentioned before, is that the classic example of the Nazir is written after the Parsha of Sota, because this is a person who experienced a very traumatic event, and as a result of that, wanted to undergo a change. Now, we're not going to focus on Sota so much, but you see that this is a person, when the Torah talks about it being a mitzvah where it outweighs the negative, it's because of a situation where someone's doing it for a reason. So what we're saying is that all Nazirim are doing mitzvahs, and all Nazirim are doing Averas, but the size of your mitzvah is going to depend on your motivation for why you're becoming a Nazir. So no two Nazirim are alike. And the question becomes, the Nazir has to ask himself, why are you taking on this restriction? And then coming back to the question of any type of restriction that a person takes, or any type of a chumrah that a person takes. The question is always going to be, well, what's motivating you to do it? Because sometimes people will take on a chumrah, and it's because they want to be seen by others as being more special. They want to be seen as different, and because of that, they'll do certain things. And the sign for whether they're doing it is how they do it in regards to other people. Like, for example, I'm going to use this as an example. Examples are always dangerous because then it becomes limited to that. But let's use the example anyway. Let's say davening along Shemona Esrei. So davening along Shemona Esrei, if you do daven along Shemona Esrei, generally people think more highly of you. Generally speaking, unless you're the person everyone's waiting for, and then but if you see someone who davens a 10-minute Shemona Esrei, I think most people say, that's someone who I'm inspired by, I want to be like that person. That's someone who's clearly dedicated to their tefillos. Now, is it possible?
Slow.
What?
Or they're very slow.
But still, that means they're patient. But is it possible that that person just wants other people to think of them that way? And so they're willing to invest 10 minutes in order to have a reputation as a person like that. It's possible, but we should never ever go there unless we have a reason to go there. Now, if that person did something to me, I'm very likely to believe, oh yeah, that person's davening, yeah. Well, why don't they go daven to the time they cut me off on the highway, right? So, but we shouldn't go there. We should assume that, but the real test for that person, how do I know if I'm just davening because there are people watching, or I'm davening because I'm trying to work harder on my davening? So the answer is a simple one. How long do you daven when you're at home? Well, it might not be the same, because when I'm at home I have certain distractions when I come to shul. But let's take a situation where you're not distracted. How do you daven then? And now what happens like this, and this is a question I think that everyone is faced with. Let's say you usually daven a 2-minute Shemona Esrei. 2-minute Shemona Esrei is very short.
How do you even comprehend what you're saying if you
Absolutely.
do 2 minutes?
And there are
What's the point to doing it if
there are
it's
plenty
only
of
2 minutes?
people they've managed. Listen, some people run like me. Some people run like Usain Bolt. I don't judge. Some people are just faster at doing things. So now let's say you sometimes, even those people who daven a 2-minute, sometimes that's what happens. All of a sudden you walk in one day and it feels like Yom Kippur, and you're just davening and you're feeling it and you're taking your time and you're moving, and then all of a sudden 3 brachas in, you're going, wait one second. There's people watching you. Maybe you're just doing it because people are watching you. But then you say, well, yeah, but does that mean I should daven fast because people are watching me so that people don't think that I think that they think? So that can be a problem. And what is the right answer to that? And the correct answer is that if you really are just doing it for other people, then maybe you shouldn't do it. But if you feel like, you know what, there are other people, but maybe I can use the fact that people are watching to motivate me to do it better, so then it's all in what's happening inside you. And the Nazir needs to be aware of when he's going through this process of what's happening.
Well, I'm just wondering, when you're trying to train yourself, you're trying to improve in a certain area, does it really, if you really are trying, does it really matter what, let's say, reward you give yourself? Like, oh, people will think well of me. That could be a reward that you're giving yourself to motivate yourself to do well. Like we bribe children all the time. We're
Right.
trying to get them, we reward them with candy, we reward them with quarters, whatever it is. So when you're trying to educate yourself to do something in a different way, what's the problem with, in a sense, obtaining that reward for yourself as a motivation so that eventually you get there for the right reason?
Well, that's the concept of mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. By doing something for the wrong reason, eventually it will lead you to do it for the right reason. But here, this is more than just for the wrong reason. This is actually misusing it to gain some kind of esteem or renown when you don't deserve it. So this can actually lead you in the wrong direction, right? And make you feel like you only need to do things on the outside, especially if you get rewarded for putting on a show.
Maybe that motivation could, I can think of a potential positive situation where, maybe there's young children around who are in the same, davening at the same time. You're thinking, oh, I'm an adult. I should be a role model for them. Maybe I should be more careful in the way that I daven or how I bow, or, in the sense that you're aware you're a role model to young children.
Right. Well, what you're doing is you're adding some additional, but sometimes that might even be an excuse for yourself. You're really doing it because you want people to honor you and respect you. I'm using the example of the long davening. It could be that in our society we're not so impressed by that. But there are other things that people can do. You can volunteer for something, and you can volunteer simply because you want people to think that you're a generous and kind person. And the whole time you're making sure that the people you want should notice you, and maybe you stay on a little longer if you see someone else stay on longer. And you could be that you're telling yourself, well, at least I'm getting something done, or I'm doing it because I want to inspire my friends to do more. If that's true, then maybe, but sometimes that's also part of the excuse that we're making for ourselves. Now you'll say, but in the end you did all this good, and the question is, how do we measure whether the good of what you've accomplished, whether it outweighs the indulgence in terms of your pride and arrogance that you've really been focusing in on? And on the contrary, maybe you should work on your humility and don't show up to this thing. And then people will say you couldn't donate 2 hours to needy children, and you say, well, I was busy, and then people think, oh, lazy bum, and then on the contrary, that'll make you feel more humble. Maybe that's more important to work on.
It used to be at certain family gatherings, in our family, there was a particular person who would always offer to help me get the food out quicker and whatever, was always offering to help me. And another particular person, he keeps saying to me, oh, they're only doing that because they want to get home by a certain time. They would always denigrate the person's motivation. And I remember saying to the second person, I don't really care what their motivation is. They're helping me.
No, absolutely.
It makes no difference.
Absolutely. If you call up the clothing organization or the food organization and say to them, I have 50 volunteers, but they're doing it for the wrong reason. They'll say, send 500 of them. They don't care because they need the help. The question is, me individually, is I'm working on myself. If I know that the only reason why I'm going is because I want to impress that specific person, and that's someone who I want should be my friend. I want to fit into that social clique. I want that person to be friendly to me. I know the gifts that they give for birthdays, and it's totally worth being that person's friend because when they plan your birthday party, it's so much cooler than when other people plan. So I want to be that person's friend. Now I know that about myself. Should I then say, but it's for a good cause, so it's okay if I do it, even though you know personally that you're doing it for the wrong reason? That's the question for us.
I would say that if you're doing the right thing for the wrong reason, but it's the right thing to do, then, like I felt with this particular person, I don't care, they're helping me, and that's a benefit.
Would you say
So
that?
That's
Would,
another
But I would
person.
say you
Crediting
cross the
another.
line when you've not made friends with the person. Maybe you still don't like them or something like that, and you're being totally deceptive with this person. I would think that would cross the line at the point where you're
Well, I didn't say you didn't like the person, but you didn't really want to help. You know for you that you don't want to volunteer. You're just volunteering because you want this person to
Well, so you're
invite you
stretching
to their vacation.
Is that
So-
Geneva
So you're
style?
stretching yourself.
No,
too
because
far.
you're not leading them on.
Who print up donor lists to inspire others to get their name on that list.
Right.
That's like Judaism 101.
Right, well, but they're assuming that the people who give want to give, they just need a little twist in the arm to give. But when they're giving, they're not only giving.
They give in levels so that
Yeah,
you know
but are they-
that those people are giving $1,000 more than you.
Right, so maybe that person needs to say to themselves, you know what, am I allowed to put my name on that list just so that I fit into that crowd? Or do I have to, in order to perform the mitzvah properly,
Or should I donate as anonymous?
but I'm not going to donate as anonymous because I can't bring myself to do that. So it's a question of whether I should give or shouldn't give. Is it that obvious that you should give if I know that for my personal avoda, it would be more important for me in terms of my growth not to give right now, in order for me to humble myself and not make myself that kind of person? It might be of greater benefit.
I
Not
think
to the
this is very,
organization.
Well, true, but I have to worry about myself.
So then give anonymously.
But I'm not going to give anonymous.
I think this
But
is.
then then that motivation that you just said.
Well, here's my
to
choice.
Be humble or that's.
It's easier for me to be humble than to give without someone recognizing my name. I'm just saying, I'm at a stage in life where I can either not give, or if I give, I need my name in lights. And so if that's my personal challenge, then maybe I should force myself to withhold myself from that experience in order not. You could say
So
to
for your own selfish reasons, you refuse to
You should be
give.
more selfish.
You refuse to give to a charitable organization.
I know, but it's hard for me because I want to give. I want my name up there with all my friends, and I know that by not having my name up there, it'll make me. It'll help me improve myself.
I don't buy it.
Well, this is the situation I've created. It's not that's the case.
This is a long way.
If if then over time you work on yourself and you are.
Well, that's my plan. That's my plan. But right now,
Right.
right now, I know that this is what I would need.
I think it's a long way from the idea of holding back from yourself, which might be an Avera. Because this is not, we're not talking about Averas here.
No, we've extended it into the concept of weighing the positive of what you're doing against the.
But I think when it comes to something like tzedakah, it's the action of doing the tzedakah, is giving the tzedakah, whether it was for a good reason or a bad reason, you gave the tzedakah and that was the important thing.
Right. So
At least
even
in
though.
that department.
Even though I know for a fact, in terms of my personal growth, it would be better for me not to join in this particular endeavor.
But
I
I
don't think that ever would come up. I don't think
I
it
don't think
should
your personal
ever-
growth
I
is
think
anything
this
to do with
business-
I don't think, yeah, I don't
the
think. it should ever
tzedakah,
come
the
up.
I mean-
tzedakah thing is not something where you're particularly depriving yourself. Maybe you're depriving yourself of the extra money that you would have had, but that's not the same thing as saying that something that's in Hashem's world that He gave for people to be able to enjoy.
Well, we've said we've gone. This is a new case. We've extended it. But let me try one more example. Maybe this is easier. Maybe there's a a learning which happens early in the morning. 5 o'clock in the morning, there's a learning. So now, I need sleep. But I can wake up early in the morning and join the Daf Yomi or whatever it is. I can join it if I take away from my sleep. I'm causing myself discomfort. It's tough. It's cold in the winter. But I can do it. But I know that the only reason why I'm doing it is because all the people who go to Daf Yomi are considered the special people in the shul. Everyone compliments them. There's always discussions and camaraderie that's going on. They have parties and they have siyumim, and really it's I want to be looked at as one of those, the better people in shul.
Shalom lishma, lo lishma. I think that you start out, it's not a good reason for it, but eventually, hopefully the learning will get to you and it'll change you.
Well, you're not saying that it's actually better to do the action. You're just giving me some reason why it's going to eventually even out.
Right.
But you are saying at this point, that day that you wake up,
I'm saying it is better to do the action.
well,
I'm saying
only
it's
because of the long term, or because a mitzvah is a mitzvah regardless of your motivation.
both. Both.
Well, so if I would
Mitzvah.
create an example where it's a one-time event and not something that's going to change me in the future, so then I should you would still say you should do it,
Yes. I think that
even though you're restricting yourself.
Someone mentioned about bribing children. Well, what do you think you do? You say, come on, go to the learning, the father-son learning, because you're going to get pizza.
Well, children are children. As adults, we have to question ourselves
But
what
we're
our
all-
motivations are.
I'm sorry, I think we all still have a child inside of us. We all still have that child. We all still need approval from someone. We all still need to be validated. We all still, every person.
At what point do we outgrow that? If at the end of our life, everything we're doing is based on the way other people perceive us, and we're not really measuring ourselves as to what we should be working on, but we're just doing the ways that's comfortable, and we're saying, listen, so I'm doing it for the wrong reason, but at least I'm doing something. You could be doing something else.
I'm not saying that everything we do is for that, but I do think that there are some things that everyone needs to hear every so often. Oh, you did a really good thing, or your learning is good, or whatever. People are you don't lose that need just because you're an adult.
I think that our society has externalized motivation to the nth degree.
I agree.
And
I
that it should
agree.
be more internalized. I mean,
Right, or who are we looking to, who are we?
Well, the question
who do we
is,
want
if
validation from?
right. So the question is in order to gain that, I don't think anyone's debating that. You're definitely better off living your life because you know these are the right choices to make, and not doing things because of peer pressure or anything like that. Everyone agrees that that's the ideal. The question is, should you allow yourself to follow into that? And again, if my example isn't a good one, make your own. But should you allow yourself to get caught up in that thing and say, well, at least I'm doing good, or should you step off that line and try to actually keep away from those things because you want to focus more on doing things without...
I think we always need to be thinking about what we're doing, to be in the moment, and to not be doing things mindlessly.
So sometimes we end up in a conflict in that area,
Right.
where we see ourselves doing something for the wrong reason. And if it's the type of situation eventually, maybe not. Maybe it's the type of thing where sometimes we need to walk away from something in order to go somewhere else and make ourselves a better person. I just want to finish.
only if we actually do that.
But
So that you probably could do that thing that makes you look good in other people's eyes, if you can also add something that doesn't.
But what it requires is a certain level of knowledge of ourselves that most of us don't go to that place. And if we say to ourselves, there's something I do, why am I doing it? What am I looking for? And as we're saying, that's the difference between the Nazir doing a mitzvah, the mitzvah outweighing the Aveira, and the Aveira, because that's all these cases, that's all we're discussing, is where I'm faced with a positive and a negative, and I'm trying to figure out which one outweighs which. I just want to finish with, that's the discussion, and please think about this and let me know your thoughts. I just want to finish with one thought, and everyone should hold on to this, and everyone will enjoy this. Reb Chizkiya, Reb Kohen, B'Shem Rav. This is a Gemara in Yerushalmi, Kiddushin, chapter 4, 13. Asid Adam Litain Din V'Cheshbon. A person is going to have to give an accounting. Al Kol Sheras Eino V'Lo Achal, for everything that you saw and didn't partake of. If you've seen something that you're allowed to have and you don't partake of it, God is going to say to you, so what'd you think of my pomegranates? And you say, well, I don't want to indulge. What'd you think of my gummy bears and my chocolate cake and the chocolate mousse and the ice cream and the cheesecake? And what'd you think of that? And you have nothing to say. Rabbi Lezer chashash lahadash mu'asar. Rabbi Lezer, he was concerned about this teaching. Umatzmiach lepritin, and so he would collect money. V'achal bahom mikol milachada b'shat, and he would eat of every food once a year. Once a year. If only once a year. So the sources cite this Yerushalmi as an important point, and that's part of what we talked about. Is that one of the reasons, and no one really mentioned this, is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a world, and God made the wine. God provided wine. And He wants us to find a way to use it in the proper way. Once a year is exactly the point. In moderation, in terms of balance, and once a year is actually a lot less than what we would consider moderation in terms of drinking. We have to think about balancing everything out and trying to figure out in every situation, what is the right measure and the right amount. And may we be zocha to balance ourselves properly and to know exactly what we do or should not
So what's the
do
answer
for us.
the child who cuts?